This is Chapter 2, Understanding the Budget Notice. As a result of the litigation in KW versus Armstrong, the Department of Health and Welfare has developed an entirely new notice packet for eligibility and budget determination. We're going to discuss in Chapter 2 what goes into the budget notice, what's included there, and how you can use it to represent your participants. So let's start with the annual notice and its parts. The notice packet consists of the eligibility letter, the appeal request form, a document entitled Why Your Budget Has Changed, a set of health and safety criteria, and the assessment tools, most of the assessment tools that we discussed in the previous chapter. We're going to go through each of those to make sure that everybody understands what the new eligibility notice packet looks like. Let's start with the eligibility letter. The eligibility letter includes the most important information. It indicates whether the individual is eligible for developmental disability services, if they're eligible for waiver services, the calculated budget that has been prepared for them, whether the calculated budget increased or decreased, and by how much, whether the individual can use their injunction budget and how much it is, and options for responding to the budget notice. We're going to go over each of those in this chapter. So let's start with the budget notice form. When we look at the budget eligibility letter, we see that it's addressed to the participant. Copies should go to several members of the care team, certainly to guardians and service coordinators. And it indicates first whether the individual is eligible for DD services and whether they're eligible for waiver services. This is important for obvious reasons. The letter also details when the next plan year will begin and provides both the calculated budget and, in most cases, the injunction budget for the coming plan year. The calculated budget is the amount that's actually calculated by the budget tool based on the inventory of individual needs and the budget tool itself, which we'll go over later. The injunction budget is the highest budget that individual has received since 2011. That refers to the injunction that was entered in the KW litigation, which prevents the department from reducing budgets below the highest budget received from 2011 to the present. The budget notice letter will inform individuals whether they have an injunction budget, whether it is more or less than the calculated budget, and which budget they're able to use, which is always the highest of the two. The eligibility letter also describes the options for responding to it. The first option is the easiest. Develop a plan within the budget, submit that plan for approval. That's the way the process has always worked and is familiar to all of you. The second step is to appeal the budget. This is, again, the process that's always been available. The budget notice lays out the process for submitting an appeal and explains what the options are, what the deadlines are, and what effect that will have on the individual's plan. The third option is new to the program and is also a result of the KW litigation. In option 3, you can both use the budget that's been provided and bring the appeal. Option 3 is available for individuals who are either new to the program or have seen an increase in their calculated budget. The problem we identified in the past was that people that were new to the program were provided a budget, but if they appealed the budget, they couldn't also begin executing a service plan. Under this new option, people that are new or people that have a higher budget can develop a temporary or provisional service plan that allows them to begin getting services right away, at the same time that they're actually appealing that budget in an effort to receive additional budget dollars. That's the new process that's available. Again, it's available for individuals who are either new to the program, and this is their first budget, or whose calculated budget has actually increased. So the budget notice describes a budget that's available and provides the 3 options for how to respond to that budget, from writing a plan for approval to appealing to doing both, writing a plan and appealing. The next section of the budget notice is the appeal form. The appeal form provides one way that you may request an appeal. It's not mandatory to use the appeal form. You don't have to use that form, and we'll talk more later in this process about whether to use the appeal form or whether to use other methods of perfecting an appeal. But let's go ahead and take a look at the form itself. The top part of the form provides the place where you can write in a short description of why the budget is being appealed. It's not necessary to provide much detail here. In fact, any document that appears to ask for a hearing is sufficient to constitute an appeal under federal law. The appeal form also provides various places to input additional information. Every person participating in an appeal is entitled to have a suitable representative of their own choosing to help them through that appeal process. If there is a suitable representative, there's an entry for that person to be identified and for them to sign the form indicating that they're willing to serve as a suitable representative. There's also an entry here for requesting additional information, which can be incredibly helpful in processing appeals. Any additional documents that you want that have not already been included with the appeal packet can be requested at the same time that you submit the appeal form. That's at the bottom of the form, and there's room to describe what you want. A common request, for instance, is to request the SIBR testing materials, which can sometimes be necessary to evaluate whether the SIBR was done correctly in a particular case. The next document in the appeal packet is one entitled, "Why Has Your Budget Changed?" At the moment, Idaho Department of Health and Welfare plans to use this form only when a calculated budget has increased over and above any injunction budget. So if an individual's budget goes up, they've informed us they'll use the "Why Your Budget Changed." Some elements of the "Why Your Budget Changed" form will be used in other cases. For instance, one section of that form will be used to provide detail about requests for intense and high-level supported living services. Unfortunately, the "Why Your Budget Changed" won't be used in every case where somebody's calculated budget has changed. I say unfortunately because it could have been useful information for service coordinators and support brokers, but you'll be able to figure out what changes have occurred on your own anyway. The next set of documents we're referring to generally as the attachments to the budget notice. The attachments include a document labeled Health and Safety Criteria, the Inventory of Individual Needs, the Individual Budget Calculation, and the Report of Adaptive Behavior Assessment, or the SIBR report. So let's talk about the Health and Safety Criteria. These criteria were developed through negotiations between Idaho Department of Health and Welfare and the attorneys representing the class in the KW litigation. They established the circumstances under which an individual participant should be provided additional budget resources to meet their needs. In evaluating and pursuing appeals, you're going to use these just as you would use any other regulation or laws. You'll use these as rules or standards of decision precisely because they've been agreed to by the Department of Health and Welfare. The next attachment in the packet is the Inventory of Individual Needs. The attachment should contain the current year inventory and the previous year inventory. Compare the two inventories when you get them. Put them side by side. See what, if anything, has changed. As I indicated previously, errors in the inventory can translate directly into errors in the budgeting. So you need to check. Did the Department of Health and Welfare miss something? Has information been incorrectly recorded? Has an error been made? Which is usually going to show up if there's been a change from one year to the next. Also compare this document to the Why Your Budget Has Changed page. If there's been a change in the budget, if the budget has increased and the Why Your Budget Has Changed page is filled out, it should also be reflected on the inventory. These documents should essentially be similar to each other. The next set of attachments is the individual budget calculation. Again, the attachment should contain the individual budget calculation for the current year and the previous year. Compare these again side by side if you can read them, and note what's different. Some inputs have no effect on the budget, and we'll discuss those in more detail. But some do have an effect on the budget, and if there have been changes in these, that might explain why the budget changed. Let's talk about the budget calculation tool in more detail. Section 1 is the participant information portion. This should match the Inventory of Individual Needs, but check for transcription errors. They do happen, we've seen them. The second section is the traditional waiver calculation. The budget tool actually calculates 3 different budgets under 2 different models. Let me explain that. It'll calculate a model coefficient, an upper margin, and a lower margin. If we look at the budget tool, we'll see items with no numbers, and those are in columns that do not affect the budget in that particular model. Columns with numbers do affect the budget. And the upper and lower margins only come into play if a budget changes by more than 25%. In that case, the upper and lower margin figures are used to reduce the size of the increase or decrease in the budget. If we take a closer look at the actual budget tool, we see, like I was saying, the columns and the rows. When we take a closer look, you'll see that some of the columns actually have numbers in them and some of them don't. The budget tool, and what we're looking at here is the budget tool for the traditional waiver model. It starts with a constant. The first column is the first column with dollar figures in it is the model coefficients, and in most cases that's what we're going to be focused on. Everybody starts with a constant of approximately $24,000. In the rows below that, that constant is either increased or decreased based on the factors appearing from the first page, which was the participant information. So for instance, we see that age, which does have a number next to it, is one of those items that affects the budget. For reasons that don't make a lot of sense to me, and which were the subject of litigation in the KW case, an individual's age reduces their budget by approximately $91 a year. Whether an individual is receiving waiver services or not also affects the budget. That's the next row. And as you go down, you see that each of the items that appeared on the first page of the budget tool, the participant information page, is duplicated here on this part of the budget tool. But most of them don't have a number next to them. If there's no number next to it, it doesn't affect the budget. So you may be surprised to learn that some of these factors in the traditional waiver model don't affect the budget. The ones that do have a number, those affect the budget. You'll see some of those numbers are negative, some of them are positive. Some of these factors reduce budget, some of them increase the budget. At the bottom, you'll see the single biggest factor determining budget in the traditional waiver model is the living situation. That's at the bottom of the page and shows that if somebody moves from a certified family home, if they move to a supported living environment, their budget will change, sometimes dramatically. These are the areas you need to look at. If there's an error on the inventory, or there's an error in transcribing the inventory to the budget tool, but it's in one of these rows that doesn't have numbers, then it doesn't matter. It's not going to affect the budget, not in this particular model. As the suitable representative, you need to be prepared to help people figure out which of these items are affecting their budget, how much it's affecting their budget, and whether we can prove that mistakes were made so as to increase the budget or otherwise change the budget. The third section of the budget tool is the calculations for the self-directed model of the program. A different set of factors determines the budget in the self-directed model. If we take a closer look, it looks very much like the budget tool for the traditional waiver model. In fact, it looks essentially identical, except that different columns and rows have numbers in them. In the self-directed program, a greater number of factors actually affect the budget. And so when we look at this, we'll see that some of the items that didn't affect budget in the traditional waiver do affect budget in the self-directed model. It's the same problem for your clients here as it would be if they were under the traditional waiver program. If there is an error in a category that affects the budget, well, it's going to affect their budget. An error in a category that doesn't affect budget isn't going to give you grounds for a successful appeal. Those are the attachments and the budget notice that you'll be receiving. In addition, you now have the opportunity to collect additional information from Idaho Department of Health and Welfare using the appeal form or submitting the request separately. This is going to provide you the new tools you need for evaluating the budget that's been produced and deciding whether an appeal is worthwhile. So let's take a look at evaluating a budget for appeal. It's really a pretty simple process. As you review the budget calculation tool, you need to be deciding whether there's a viable appeal for your client there. In evaluating that budget for appeal, you're going to look at, first, whether there are identifiable errors. Errors in the inventory, for instance, that don't get carried over into the budget tool don't do you much good. Errors in the SIBR in categories that don't affect the budget don't do you much good. So are there identifiable errors in the budget tool is going to be the critical question you ask. Second, you're going to ask, are those errors that actually change the budget? An error that actually works in your client's favor, resulting in a higher budget than they would otherwise get, is not necessarily something you want to appeal. An error in a category that doesn't change the budget at all isn't worth pursuing. In those cases, I recommend simply that the assessor be informed, preferably by letter or email, that an error was made so that hopefully it gets corrected before next year's assessment. But an error that doesn't affect the budget isn't going to give you much room for appeal. And finally, the third question is, will the enhanced budget actually help the client? Many clients aren't using their entire budget because they're not eligible for additional services for reasons other than the budget. And so getting an enhanced budget for an individual who can't qualify for more services doesn't do them, you, or the program any good. The final attachment you're going to see in the budget tool is the Report of Adaptive Behavior Assessment. This is the report generated by the SIBR tool. It's generally of limited use in budget appeals. What it does do is lay out the general maladaptive index and the broad independent age, both of which can have an effect on the budget. However, skilled care providers will use the report and the SIBR more broadly to help plan appropriate supports and programs for the participant. What's important to review in each assessment is whether there are significant changes in the SIBR. If a SIBR sees a significant change from one year to the next or even over a 2-year period, you need to more closely evaluate whether there are errors in the assessment process. It's not that SIBR results don't change, it's that they tend to change slowly, and they tend to change when somebody's running a really good program, frankly. So if you see large changes in SIBR scores, evaluate more closely for whether errors were made.